Welcome to Dracaena Wines Podcast. Our wines plus your moments equals great memories. I'm your host, Lori, and this is a podcast about all things wine. Hey everyone, thanks for listening in. I have a great one for you today. In fact, it was so great that I have to split it and share it over 2 weeks. Something this good deserves more than 1 week. It took a while, in fact several months, but we finally got our schedules to mesh, and it was well worth the wait. I had the honor of sitting down with Stuart Smith of Smith-Madrone Winery in Napa. In May of 1971, with a partnership of family and friends, Stuart Smith bought a terroir, which today is Smith-Madrone Vineyards and Winery. He was 22 years old at the time, just received his BA in economics from UC Berkeley, and taking classes towards his master's in viticulture. He found this land, he had a passion, he had a mission, and he hasn't looked back ever since. His breadth of knowledge and passion are incredible. I know you are going to enjoy this. Sláinte. Hi everybody, welcome to this episode of Dracaena Wines on Wine, and I am beyond ecstatic tonight because in my opinion, we've got like a maverick here tonight. We've got somebody that, in terms of winemaking, that I look up to, that I think is outrageous, and the wines blow my mind. I mean, the Riesling is the wine that, I might possibly kill somebody for this Riesling. It is so good. But anyway, without any further ado, I am very honored and very proud to introduce Stuart Smith from Smith-Madrone. So, hi, Stu.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
How are you doing tonight?
Fine.
You're cold, right?
Well, it's all relative. I left the winery a little less than an hour ago, doing this from home. And it was like 39. So, while it may be cold for us, you put it in perspective in what was it? Duluth and Ely and International Falls were like minus 29. I think International Falls hit like minus 44.
Yeah.
And that's an 80 degree swing.
Yeah, it is. It is insane. So I am currently on the wrong coast. I am here in New Jersey. And last week, not even last week, 4 days ago, we were -1 and then the wind chill was like minus 16. And It was so cold. And today I was out like this, no jacket, whatever, because it was 61 degrees out today. So,
well, you're doing well.
Yeah.
We had snow overnight.
Yeah, I saw the social media pictures of it. That's crazy. So, is it
not that unusual?
Really?
I think it was. I was talking with my brother today about it. We both think it was 73, where we had 2 feet of snow on the mountain.
Oh, wow. But that was 73. That was, that's not, so snow is not really a common thing, right? It kind of flurries?
Well, not that much, but we get an inch or 3 every 2 or 3 years.
Oh, all right. That's more than what I thought you actually got. But you're up high. So what about down lower? Are they getting?
I can remember. No, there's no snow down here. But I can remember at least 2 times where there's been snow in the valley.
Oh, okay.
And my brother was going to school at Berkeley in the early 60s. I went in the mid-60s. And I think it snowed in San Francisco in the early 60s. But, we'll see. It hasn't snowed in the city, San Francisco being the city.
Right.
Hasn't snowed in the city for a long time. But St. Helena, the valley, I can remember two good times where we got 2, 3, 4 inches.
Oh.
Substantial. The smash repair places were very happy because there were lots of cars going in to get repaired. So
nobody knows how to drive out there for when that happens, right?
Nobody does. And then the young. I used to say young males, and now it's the young males and the young females are just like nuts. they've joined the crazies, and it's a different world. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
Mostly we'll all survive them.
Well, yeah. Well, I can't wait for the day that I am permanently, out in Paso, where I'm not really getting any more snow. I'm done with snow. Once I get one snow a season, and I'm done with it. After the first snowfall, where I'm like, oh, look at how pretty, then I'm done with it. I don't want it anymore.
Well, I will say, we all ate outside at a table, and it was a spectacular, clean, crisp, fun day to be on the mountain.
Did you have a heater? I wouldn't be sitting outside.
No. I mean, look, we don't stay out there. If we get cold, we go inside.
Yeah.
The sun was out, and there's something with a fresh snowfall that just cleans the air. It's like it's scrubbed.
Yeah. I know what you mean. There is a certain scent, certain like feeling when that snow is falling. It really is.
Very cool. But anyway.
Yeah. But we are here not to talk about snow. We are here to talk about Smith-Madrone and wine and your amazing history. I'm going to start off kind of from the beginning. So Smith-Madrone actually was founded in 1971, correct?
71.
Yeah. So you have been producing wines. First off, what do you think are some major changes, or the biggest changes you've seen from when you started the winery to today? What are the changes in the wine industry? What are the changes in you, in your wine?
Well, there are many changes, both viticulturally and winemaking, and then just in the valley itself. From the vineyard side of things, it's a dramatic change. In 1971, when we planted the vineyard, the valley was using 6-foot wooden stakes. They planted on a 12 by 8 spacing. They had 2 wires. They had a fruiting wire and a catch wire. And a lot of people would use split stakes. And money was really, really, really important back then because nobody had a lot of it. So there was a lot of sweat equity that went into vineyards and a lot of time. And all of that has changed really dramatically. We now, for instance, at Smith-Madrone, our first planting was 12 by 6 feet wide. The rows were 12 foot wide and 6 feet between the vines. And that was similar to the valley floor, but 2 feet closer because theirs was 12 by 8. And then I experimented with a whole bunch of different spacings. We went to 11 by 6, 12 by 7. Basically, I was looking at a way for working on the slopes because some of the slopes were steeper. And when you have a steeper slope, it's got to be a little wider so that you can get the tractor and everything through. And then on the less steep, you go a little narrower. We've now changed to if there's a default for spacing in the vineyards, it's 10 by 5 for cordon, a bilateral cordon. And if we're going to use cane pruning, it's 10 by 6. And then we have where the industry had 2 wires back then. I now have, let's say, cordon, and hopefully your listeners will understand what cordon. That's where there's two permanent arms going in each direction. We would have a fruiting wire that's at 38 inches, and then a foot up from that, we'd have a 6-inch cross arm, and then 24 inches up, we'd have a foot cross arm, and at 36 inches up, we'd have a 2-foot cross arm. So instead of, that's 2, 4, 6, 7 wires, where in the old days we had just 2. And so we've extended the trellis both vertically and horizontally. And when we do it with Cabernet and we do cane pruning, instead of a single wire, we start out with 2 wires that are 14 inches apart. Same at 1 foot, they're at 18 inches. At 2 foot, they're at 30 inches. And at 3 feet, they're at 36 inches cross arms. So it really expands and opens up the vine, allows sunlight to get into the grapes, which is so important. And then the road direction. When I started, we did it all based on contours going across the road, across the slope for soil protection. And we were one of the first people to go to non-till back in the late 70s. And then what we learned is that with non-till, which is like if you had a grass grow in a yard, and it would grow all winter, and you wouldn't water it, and it would eventually die out. And then with the first rains, it pops right back up. So the ground is covered during the summertime, so it cuts down on dust. And if you do get a rain early, then it's there to protect the soil. So the point in this is that we didn't have to worry about soil erosion any longer, because we basically got it. I don't want to say whoop, but it's a whole lot better than we ever had. And so now we can lay out our rows for sunlight. And if our rows ran in an east-west direction, and Smith-Madrone is at 38.5 degrees latitude, and if we ran our rows east-west, then the sunlight would fall on the south-facing grapes the entire time. And we learned somewhere in the early 80s that we needed sunlight on the berries themselves. And with the sunlight only on the south side, you got uneven ripening, because the south side gets all that sun and they tend to shrivel. And the north side of the same cluster is nice and plump and juicy, so you have uneven ripening, not good. So as I like to say, we're smart little boys and girls. We can figure this one out, so we're going to plant north-south. And then we'd have an even amount of ripening of sunlight in the morning, same in the afternoon. But then this is California, and I would take the morning shift where it's cool and nice, and the vines have had all night to kind of replenish water, and then I'm going to turn it over to you in the afternoon, and you go, well, wait a minute, this isn't fair, because I'm starting my shift in the afternoon when it's hot. So we go, okay, let's go in a northeast, southwest direction. And maybe that angle is anywhere from 20 degrees off of true north to maybe 40 degrees off of true north. And the idea is that we would have 55% of the sunlight on the morning side, 55, 60%. And then on the afternoon side, when it's hotter, you would have less sun, maybe in that 45, 40% range. And then but then you have to take into consideration that the hottest part of the day on the mountain is around 3:30, and the sun goes over the top of the vines when it's at about 28 degrees. It goes over the top of the vines at around 1:45. So the hottest part of the day, which is when we want them protected, is at 3:30-ish. But if we lay the rows out for that, it's too much of an east-west basis. So we need a trellis system to protect them in the morning. And the reason for our trellis system that I designed is that it gives it an umbrella shape, or like a tulip that goes up and out and arches over. And so the vines protect the grapes with shade in the late afternoon sun and in the early morning sun. And so that's a huge improvement in wine quality, because we're able to give the winemaker, us, a better grape. So that's just an amazing advancement in viticulture. And then in the winery, we really just do things so much more differently. I would say the biggest thing with red wines is that we're trying, and we understand that different machines, different types of stemmer crushers handle the stems differently. And in the old days, we would get broken, especially with Cabernet Sauvignon. We call them the little stems, the secondary rapes that comes off the main stem of the grape. And a lot of times those will get into the must. And those stems, what we would call jacks or even broken stems, give out a lot of tannin. And so we actually own 3 different stemmer crushers, and we use a different stemmer crusher for red grapes, most of the red grapes, and we use a different one for the white grapes. And by doing that, that's made a major difference in the tannin levels of red wines. And so 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago when we started this thing, a lot of wines in Northern California were extremely tannic. And now we've been able to mitigate that tannin by having very gentle stemmer crushers that remove the berries from the stems to where there's almost zero stems that get into the fermentation, into the must. So those are two major things. And then from a practical point of view, when we started, we did everything by hand, and we filled and corked and labeled by hand. And it was a nightmare, just a nightmare. And then we had to put these stupid warning labels on, so we ended up with a back label, and we couldn't do back labels by hand. It was just too much. You put the front label on, that's fine. But if you have to then turn it over, try to get the register right. In other words, it's all nice and neat. And then your fingers have got sticky glue all over them. And it's just like, oh, man, get me out of this mess. and right at that time, they started doing custom bottling. And now that is I think the singular biggest thing for small wineries is that we don't have to have our own equipment any longer.
Yeah.
So a truck drives up. It's got $1 million. It's worth $1 million of both the truck and all the equipment inside. And we now bottle somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 95 bottles a minute. The fit and finish and the presentation is so cool. There's no longer dirty fingerprints all over the bottle. We can get the entire production for us done in like 2 days.
Oh, wow.
And in the old days, we would do 300 cases a day of fill and cork and pack off. Then we come back another day and we dump the cases out. We would then foil and label them and pack them off. 300 cases a day would be a lot.
Yeah.
We can do 3,000 cases in a day. Almost, not quite, but if everything works right, we could do that. So it's those are phenomenal changes in the industry. Then you have the Napa Valley itself, and as I like to now say, it reminds me of the Italian Renaissance, with all of these new wineries that are designed to the nth degree, and it reminds me of, as I like to say, my Duomo's bigger than your Duomo, and my church painter is more famous than your church painter. And we've kind of lost perspective of what wineries are. They are a room where it's a neat process, but the grapes don't know that they're not in a Corinthian column, spectacular, monument to the ego of the owner. And grapes come in and wine come out the other end. And they don't know if they're in a Butler building or a 20th century building or a 14th century building. They don't care. But a lot of these new owners really do care. And they're coming, they're titans of industry from Silicon Valley. And, this too shall pass.
They've got the money to spare, they feel like they've got to use the money for something, and they want it to look, all I want is that our equipment works and that, the fruit comes in, isn't damaged, and is, processed correctly. Right. That's all I care about,
Exactly. That's all that matters. You've got to keep your eyes on the prize, which is the fruit and the winemaking process.
Right.
As long as you have the barrels and refrigeration and reasonably good equipment, that's all you need. Okay. Again, my Duomo is bigger than your Duomo. It just doesn't work for me.
So I've got to go back. So you were saying that you initially did your own bottling and corking and all that. So when Mike and I started making wine for non-commercial, our first vintage, we hand bottled everything and hand corked everything, and we used the actual corker, and I died. I literally died, and I'm fit. I lift, I do all that, and I died. And then the labels were a whole other, and we didn't even need the back label because it wasn't commercial, so we didn't have to have all of that, fancy snancy stuff on it or whatever. But I can't imagine, and that was just, a small production because it was just for us, basically. I can't imagine doing it commercially that way. I mean, how many people did you have? Doing 300 cases a day, how many people did you have?
Well, I would be at the corker, and I would pull we had a 14 spout rotary filler.
Okay.
It was Italian. And then we had a Girondin corker, and the corker was automatic in that it constantly put a cork. When it was running, it would put a cork into the jaws, and the head would come down and shove it in. And if you left the bottle there when you shouldn't have, it would put a second or a third cork. And it was a good manager because you would get squirted with wine. And if you didn't have a bottle there, the corks just kept plopping down and on through. So you got into a rhythm of moving it off, and from the spigot of the filler into the corker, and then you would move it off and move it over, and that was fine. I was good with that. I could do that all day long. It was brainless, mind numbing work. But you get into a rhythm. It was cool. I hated labeling. Just hated labeling because I didn't want to have it off.
Center. Off.
And I couldn't ever get it. I was always and then your fingers get glue on them. And
you're doing this with the label, right? You're shaking your hand.
Right. It was just awful. And then you had little pot Devon labelers, so you would take one label at a time and put it through the labeler, and then you bring it out on the other side, and then you'd have a little wooden jig that you'd lay the bottle down. Mm-hmm. I'm sure same thing with you. And you get it there, and then you put it down, and then you look at it, and you go, and then off it would go. And then you'd have a 5-gallon bucket of water next to you, because the ones that were really bad, you could just drop them into the water. Yeah. And then later, at a break, you take them out, scrape off the label, and then you'd run them through again and hope you did a better job. I hated that part. Now, fortunately, my brother didn't mind labeling. He hated what I did, so it really worked out. It was really a good division of labor.
That's good. That's good.
We're young. And, when you're young, you can do all kinds of things.
Yes. So going back into your vineyard, so one of the things when we were at UC Davis and we were studying the soils and all of that for the class, one of the things that really intrigued me was leaf layering. So to help with the protection of the fruit by how many layers of the fruit. So now you're creating this umbrella. Are you still concerned? Are you still concerning yourself with the leaf layers because you're kind of creating it a different way?
Right. We do go through and pull leaves. I would say that what our program is we will go early after fruit set, and we'll go through and we'll pull a little bit on the morning side, just a little bit of leaves. And we'll go through and probably leaf 3 or 4 times. And we'll go through and we'll do 2 times on the morning side. And then about that time, we'll go and do a very light leafing on the afternoon side. And then before harvest, within maybe a week of harvest, we'll go through and we'll pull out a lot of leaves. And we do the original leafing to get sunlight in, but not too much. We, dappled sunlight is what we're all looking for. But then before harvest, we go through and we pull a lot more leaves. And what that does is it allows our crew to go through and
quicker
and put their energy into harvesting the grapes as opposed to pulling the leaves out of everything and having to pull, canes out of the way. And we hope we have a trellis system that facilitates all of that, but still you have to pull leaves, and it just makes it easier. It's hard to pick. We do everything by hand. And when you're all day long pulling leaves and trying to find the clusters, it's just easier to go through like 3, 4, 5 days, maybe a week ahead of time, and get as much of that out of there as you can. We don't strip all the leaves because we could run into a heat spell.
Right.
But especially with Cabernet and with Cabernet Franc, which are late ripening, we can get a rain. And in 2011, there was a really big rain. I think it was October 5th, and the valley got 5 inches of rain. And down in the valley floor, it was a sauna bath. And there was a lot of rotten mold that came up. And we were really lucky because we leafed all of the vineyard that was left to be picked about a week earlier. And so when that rain came, we were in great shape because the sun came out and we had a little bit of wind because we're at 1,900 feet. And so that saved our bacon. We had no rot, no mildew, nothing. Sam brought a bunch of his friends up, and they all thought we had one of the cleanest vineyards in the valley. And we loved the 2011. That was the last of the 3 really cool years. 09, 10, and 11 were extremely cool. And a lot of people had trouble getting, especially with the 11, getting things right, but it worked for us.
Well, that's what matters, right?
Yeah. And a lot of it is luck. We just happened to, we didn't know the rain was coming, and we just happened to leaf ahead of time in a way that was beneficial for us.
Right.
And a lot of this has to do with luck too. I mean, you're farmers first and foremost, but you do live by the whims of nature.
Yep. Mother Nature is really the boss.
Yes, she is.
So you guys are located in Spring Mountain District, and that really came along rather late in terms of being recognized, right? It was like 1993, so you were there quite some time before it actually became recognized. So did you have a gut feeling about it? Did you not care if it was recognized, not recognized? You just, what made you choose that location?
Well, well, first of all, Spring Mountain is, Spring Mountain has historically been one of the earliest sub-appellations in the valley. Now, we didn't have AVAs, American Appellation issues, until much, much later. But back in the 19th century, Spring Mountain was known for grapes, as was Diamond Mountain. There wasn't much on Howell Mountain. I don't think there was much on Mount Beater. There were a certain amount on Mount Beater, but not very much. And the whole Pritchard Hill where Chapelet is above Hennessy, that didn't exist.
Oh.
So we always, when I found the property, I was looking for mountain property for 2 reasons. One, 2 fundamental reasons. And that is, I think it was Virgil in 43 BC wrote a treatise on farming. And in it, he said, Bacchus loves the hills, Bacchus collis amate. And that's where they recognized that the best grapes came from the mountains. And the second, and I think that is true today. That is the primer number 1, if you would. And primer number 2 is that to make great wine, you have to have great grapes. And think of 4 or 5 day old fish versus fresh fish. And it's the same thing. You can make that older fish not appear as bad as it might be, but you can never make it into something that it was once.
Right.
And the same thing goes with wine. You have to have the best grapes to make the best wine. Now, with not so good grapes, you can use a lot of technology to make them better than they should be, but you can never make them into anything of real promise.
Right.
And when you have great grapes, you don't have to do much because, as we all like to say, the wine is made in the vineyard. And it's our job as the growers to not screw that up, and as winemakers to get that into the glass. But and then the question is why is it why are the grapes from the mountains as I claim, better than in the valley floor. Now, I have a lot of really good friends in the valley floor, and we all do a certain amount of good-natured kidding. And there are a lot of wines that are made poorly in the mountains, and there are a lot of very good wines in the valley floor. But that being, all things being equal, a vineyard is on the mountain is going to struggle, and the berries are going to be smaller, and you will have a much greater skin to juice ratio on a mountain-grown grape because it's smaller. Now, a dramatic example would be, think of a golf ball or of a marble compared to a beach ball. And that beach ball has got a huge amount of volume to skin, and the marble has a great deal, or the golf ball, or baseball even, has a great deal of skin to the juice. And since all the flavors and color and tannins are in the skin, all things being equal again, you're going to have intrinsically more flavors in the smaller berry than you are in the other berry. Now, I do a couple presentations like this, and I did one at a business school recently, shall go unnamed, and I said to the kids, how many of you kids, there's like 200, there's 65 kids there, all top-end business school, obviously future titans of the world. And I said, how many of you people grow tomatoes? One hand went up, over 64 people. And I said, well, kind of ruined that story for me, but here's the story. If you grew tomatoes at home and you watered them every day and you gave them fertilizer once a week, you're going to have a beautiful looking tomato plant, and you're going to have these great big luscious red tomatoes. And when you bite into them, they are going to be watery and bland because they're nothing but water. And had they withheld the water, withheld the fertilizer, the tomato would be smaller, not nearly as pretty, but way more flavorful. And that's the same analogy we're trying to do with mountain vineyards. We don't give in most cases, we dry farm, not 100%, but in most cases. And so the vines just get what Mother Nature gives them. So they have to struggle for nutrients, they have to struggle for water, and they produce smaller berries of intense flavor. And that's why I went to the mountains, to get just that thing. 48 years later, I wouldn't change it a whit. I still believe then exactly what I believe today.
And what's the soil on the mountain?
We're primarily an Aiken stony clay loam. It's a red soil that has rocks all through it. It's a wonderful vineyard soil. It's very well drained. Not high in fertility, but relatively deep. And it has rocks, little rocks, big rocks, and then really big rocks. We replanted a vineyard, a block. We call it Old Cook's Flat. That's just the name of the block. It's an area that's relatively flat. We farmed it for 40 years, and we tore it out because we had phylloxera. And we ripped it, and we brought a big tractor in, and up popped these boulders that were probably 2-3 tons each.
Oh my God.
So big that my little crawler could barely move them. And we've been farming around them for 40 years. Then with Aiken, you get a complexity. You don't just go from one soil type and there's a sheer change into another type. So we complex into both what's called the kid and the forward soils. And so those are all complexing in there together. And it's a dominant soil on the western Mayacamas range. And the underlying geology is really cool in that when I bought the property in 1971, nobody knew really what the geology was because plate tectonics was only just coming into vogue, being accepted. And what they now know is that the Pacific plate subducts underneath the continental plate, and as it does that, it ground off the top of the marine base, the ocean floor, and it ground into the continental plate, where I don't know. And it made this big aggregate, kind of like a concrete aggregate of all kinds of different soils. And this soil, or this base, is called the Franciscan series, and it's 250 million years old. And then laying on top of that are what's called the Sonoma volcanics. And that's where the soil weathered from. And if it was weathered from the lava flow, you have one type of soil, which is what we have. That's where the Aiken, stony clay loam, and the forward and the kid comes from. And if you have the ash that all collected, maybe it flew down into a valley, or maybe it did something, then you have a different type of soil, and that's a much lighter, whiter soil, and we don't think it's as good for vineyards, and it does erode a little bit more, doesn't have the rocks in it that our volcanic soil has. But these are all kinds of interesting tidbits of what makes the area unique.
When you were ripped up for phylloxera, well, let's go back to when you first started. How many acres did you plant? Did you just go gung-ho and say, all right, we're ripping this stuff up and we're planting? Or did you do block by block and grow?
A little bit of both. What you have to understand is that most of the vineyards that we have today were originally planted in the early 1880s by a guy named George Cook. And he homesteaded the property and planted the vineyard and planted a bunch of olive trees. If you go on our website, you'll see a bunch of olive trees, and those were planted by George Cook. That's all we have left of that originated originally with the property. But in the late 19th century, phylloxera came to Napa Valley, and all of the vineyards. We have a 1905 article from the St. Helena Star, and it says that all of the vineyards on Spring Mountain had been abandoned because of phylloxera. And the valley floor had vineyards, but they had been replanted in the 1890s, early 1890s. And the valley, and there was, and I can't prove this, but a lot of the old timers have told me that at that time there were more vineyards in the hills than in the valley floor. And much like Europe was in the 19th century, the valley floor was used for crops for eating, vegetables and row crops and things that couldn't be grown on the mountain, that needed more water down in the valley floor. And on the mountains, they could grow wine, and good wine, and olives. And so that's why there was and they claim, but I can't prove it, that there were more vineyards in the hills back at that time than there were in the valley floor. But then as agriculture changed, prunes went into the valley floor, walnuts went into the valley floor, stone fruit type things. I remember the last pear orchard being yanked out of the valley. And those kinds of crops can't grow in the mountains. They need very good deep soil. They need lots of water, and those things simply aren't available on the mountain. And so that was kind of self-selecting. But when I first walked the property in the fall, early fall of 1970, it was a completely dense forest all over again. And there were Douglas fir trees that were 2.5 feet in diameter and 80 feet tall.
Oh.
So I had to get a logging permit from California Forestry, and it still gives me a chuckle that we had to log the vineyard to reclaim it. And we logged 1 million board feet of timber out of it.
Wow.
And the reason I wanted that property is because I could tell that the trees were young, but grew well. And we were next to our neighbor downslope and to the east of us was Stony Hill, and they were in a good climate location. They had a similar soil as we had. And so that's what kind of brought it all together.
And when you started planting, did you get the vines from, like UC Dave, from a nursery? So you started them really young?
Well, actually, it's even a little bit more esoteric in that I was a grad student at UC Davis in viticulture and enology, and I got the very first heat-treated vines to go into the Napa Valley. And in fact, the vines and our vineyard I was able to get the vineyard certified as an increase block so that we could sell cuttings off of the vines, because they were the first heat-treated vines to come into the Napa Valley. Now, the flip side of it is that they were not on rootstock. They were on their own roots. So I planted 5 acres of Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling, and an acre of AXR. AXR number 1. And the idea was that I would plant the 20 acres, then I'd have the acre of AXR, and I would make cuttings, and I would make my own bench crafts, and then I would plant out the rest of the vineyard by doing it ourselves. And that's what we did. We built a little greenhouse. We got the machinery, and we made our own bench crafts, and we calloused them up and nurseryed them. And then I got a digger, and we plant them and then dig them up. And where we did that is still what we still call it the nursery Cabernet, or whatever grapes go in there. It's still considered the nursery, because that's where we grew all our plants to expand out the rest of the vineyard.
That's incredible. That's really incredible. Did you have botany in your background, or was this all what you learned at UC Davis? Wow.
Davis, grad student. My undergraduate degree was in econ at Berkeley. And in a lot of ways it was really valuable. Not, people say, oh, you must be a good business person because you took econ. Econ doesn't have a thing to do with business. As a matter of fact, probably it held me back from that point of view. But what it did give me, and I was a macroeconomist, the big picture. And so it really gave me a great view of the industry. And then when I went to Davis, then I got into the minutiae of making wine and the detail. And so I had this macro point of view, and then I had this kind of intense detail oriented. And I think that was really good. And it also gave me, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how your view is, a way of critically looking at the world. One of my most fun graduate seminars is that we were given research papers, and we were told to basically rip into them. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What's wrong with this paper? Where is it weak? And so it really teaches you to critically evaluate what you're looking at, and not just read through and go, oh, that's interesting, and they must be right, or what's their methodology? What was their hypothesis? Did they really have a good reason to come up with their results from their research? So that was really fun and interesting.
That really is so for Mike and I have a microbiology degree, and Mike is a food scientist. So we're both kind of at that minuscule, that organic level. So when we went to UC Davis, when we took the program at UC Davis, that was an introduction to the big picture of things. So I understand what you're saying. I would like more of the big picture. I would like to, work a full harvest. Like we don't, we have people come in and harvest for us, and we source our fruit. So I'm not farming it. Although I give you so much credit, because I don't ever want to be a farmer, because I know how much work that is. It's like every day, intense day, everything you do in that. But I would like to have a picture into it, a little, snapshot of what it's like to do that. Because you really are doing it from dirt to bottle, and that is amazing to me.
There's a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction in sitting down and having a glass of wine at the dining room table. And I think it's the most elegant beverage in the world, in the universe. And you get to play in dirt. You know, this little boys like dirt, and like dirt. And you look at this, and one of the things that I will take to my death is sulfuring on a full moon. And if it's really just the right, perfect, you can turn the lights on, and you're just going down the rows, and you're putting out sulfur dust, and what works great, the sulfur dust just drops. It doesn't go up in the air. It goes down into the vines, and you're just all there at like 3 a.m, and it just doesn't get any better than that. One with the earth. Yeah. Maybe I'm just a little crazy, but I love that stuff, and when it all works, it's just magical.
So you were saying the boys love the dirt. So how much fun did you have taking down the trees?
Well, I drop trees when I have to, but we brought in commercial loggers.
Too many for you? Too many,
and frankly, working in a forest like that, it's not a place for amateurs. You really got to have the pros come in, and there weren't many, and we actually have protected almost all of the important redwoods on our property. We have some old growth that now is in a conservation easement. And one of the things I had to do when the loggers came in was kind of give them a white lie. Don't you have any canyons around here? No, sir, we don't. Because I knew what they wanted. They wanted the big redwoods. But if you've never seen a redwood felled, it is a thing of beauty. The faller cuts it in just such a way that the tree bounces from one tree to another tree to another tree, and basically just kisses the ground.
Wow.
It comes down so gently. And the reason for that is if you drop a Douglas fir, a redwood like a Douglas fir, you're going to drop a Douglas fir, hits the ground, and it's like, number 6 on the seismic scale. But if you do that with a redwood tree, you're going to break it, and you've wasted it. Because the wood of the redwood will shatter.
Oh.
And we have an area that's completely protected, that has old growth redwoods in it, and some of these redwoods may well be 700 to 1,000 years old. They're just magnificent, over 200 feet tall. They're just phenomenal. But anyway, I still have to take down trees with the drought. We've lost and bark beetles. We would only take out the trees that we had to, and my brother would angst and I, and we'd look at it, we'll leave it. And then if it died or something like that, then they'd have to come down. So I've gotten pretty good at taking down trees. But I do. I mean, there's a little boy in me still, and I do like dropping the trees. I miss the healthy tree. But this is one of the things that's going on with I call it global chaos, because I think global chaos is a much better description of the environment we're in now, as opposed to global warming or global change. Those are boring terms. Global chaos, that says it all to me.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. And now, a word from our sponsor. Did you know that Dracaena Wines now has a wine club? We named it the Chalk Club. Draco was on our label, but Vegas was getting a little jealous, so we decided he deserved to be our club spokesdog. In Las Vegas, betting chalk means that you are betting on all of the favorites. We are betting that we are one of your favorite wineries, so we thought the name was apropos. The club is simple, yet a bit different than most. When you wager on us, we will ship you 3 bottles of wine twice a year, once in April and once in September. You can choose all red or mix of red and rosé. You immediately receive 15% off of all your wine purchases throughout the year, but what makes our club stand out is the progressive discount. Let your club membership ride into the next year. Your discount increases. Each year you parlay your membership, you receive an additional 5% off up to a planned maximum of 25%. Your club shipments are discounted to a flat $15, plus we'll cover your club shipping cost for your second shipment. That's $15 house money in a sure bet for you. So please head to our website, dracaenawines.com, and find out all of the benefits of joining the Chalk Club and how to sign up. We've stacked the odds so that you can get our award-winning wines without breaking the bank.
And one of the problems we're having is that with the droughts, the droughts and the trees, and the other problem we have with our forests, and I think we're going to get this changed a little bit in the future, that the forests, our forests in the north of San Francisco, surrounding San Francisco, were all, mostly, not all, and some of our forests were previously logged, but the areas that we protected had not been logged. But a lot of the forests in that area were logged for the building of San Francisco, and then again for the 1906 earthquake. And what happened at that time, they go and they cut the trees, and then the hardwoods, which would be the black oaks, the madrones, the tan oaks, were released, and so they grew and became dominant. And it took a long time for the Douglas firs to come back in to become the dominant tree, and those trees are now dying. Those hardwoods, and now they're clogging up the forest, and there's a huge amount of fuel in the forest, and we just simply have to get the fuel out of the forest. Otherwise, we're going to have more uncontrollable wildfires like we've had in the last 4 or 5 years. And the state government, and I think with the federal government, are going to start funding some of this stuff on in an area. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to work, but we'll find out. We'll see what happens. So I think there's some good things that are happening for California forests that unfortunately took a tremendous, tragedies to motivate the government to do something.
Right. And your terms of chaos, I agree 100%. It's not, it's not just warming, it's seasonal changes. Like back here on the East Coast, our coldest weather always used to be December into January into like the beginning of February. Then it would start to warm up. Now we don't get any snow in December. In December we're still in light shirts and I call it hoodie weather. The shorts and the hoods. The hoodies. And then now we're getting blizzards in March. And, we never had that. And I think what saddens me the most is, one of the things that is good about New Jersey in terms of, what I like is that we actually do get 4 seasons, that we have those 4 seasons, and that's going away. We now have summer and winter, that spring and that fall section are just, kind of getting smaller and smaller. And then it blows out of the water. So I love the fact that you're calling it chaos, because I think that's a much better terminology for it. It's sad, but it's true.
Yeah, it is. And back to the forest, and unfortunately, I think, and this is a little political, Jerry Brown did a great job as governor, but he would blame everything on global change, global warming, when really it was an excuse for negligence on the part of the government. As an example, we almost lost the Oroville Dam a couple of years ago. 200,000 people had to be evacuated. And the reason they had to be evacuated wasn't over global chaos. It was because they had done a rotten job of maintaining that dam, and a bunch of the valves wouldn't open.
Right.
And so now we have, anyway, I'm getting far afield here. We don't want
That's okay. So if I bring it back to your site, when you were doing, ripping, falling the trees and doing all that, you actually found underground caves, correct? That were,
no, they were not we didn't find them. The property was at one time 550 acres.
Okay.
And and it got subdivided, and the property that we owned was originally 200 acres. They broke off the first 200 acres, and then they subdivided the rest of the 350 acres into 20 and 40 acre parcels. And on one of those other parcels is an old wooden winery. We had the majority of the vineyards, but there were other parcels that had vineyards. And there was this wooden winery that, again, was built in the early 1880s. And they would crush, ferment, and press. And then they would gravity flow down into a cave that I assume was built by the Chinese coolies at the end of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, because there were a lot of Chinese that came into the valley because there were a number of small caves. And these people were very skilled at doing that kind of stuff. And so about a third of a mile west of our property is a cave that goes in maybe 30 or 40 feet, and then turns to the west and runs 100 feet, and does get into a really nice sandstone formation where you can still see the pick marks, where it was all done by hand. But going in, they didn't find a good site, and they built stone arches to hold up the ceiling. And again, we think it was the Chinese that were here and we're doing that work. But anyway, that was the cave. And unfortunately, it wasn't on our property, which we would dearly love to have had.
Oh.
But the person who owns it is a really good friend, and he did home winemaking in it, so it still has some use. And the thing about the cave, which most people don't understand, and modern caves aren't like this, but a real cave, the water comes down through it. And so caves in the wintertime can be quite wet. And what we also found, because my brother and I started a little bit of wine up there with the owner's wine, and we found, and he was relatively new to the mountain too. And what we found is that the little creepy crawlers loved the ammonium that was in the glue. And so if you weren't careful, the little creepy crawlers would come along and chew off the labels because they wanted to get to that glue. And so we had more than one bottle of wine. Where we went,
they were the pre-stoners. That's how they were getting high.
Yeah. So, but it that period of time was a different period. It was a really innovative time. You'd go to a dinner and everybody would sit around and talk wine and drink too much, and the next morning you'd wake up and you go, God, that was a really good idea. And so you go out and try it. And therein lies, I think, a really important difference for your listeners, in that in California, the U.S., if you can think of it, you can do it. And in Europe, if you think about it, you can't do it. They are so restricted by regulations on how to make wine, what grapes to grow where, what the spacing is, how many tons to the acre they can get, or kilograms per hectoliter. All of it, the whole concept of innovation has been lost. And when I was at UC Davis, I first went there. As a matter of fact, I went there as a senior at Berkeley. I became what was called an intercampus exchange student, and I took the class, liked it, and decided I wanted to go into the wine field. So as a senior, I was taking Chem A, B, C, and then I had to do a lot of makeup my first year as a grad student. As you know, in your fields of inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, bacteriology, all this other stuff, plant physiology, plant pathology. So I went from a really soft science to a really deep science. Yeah. And when I was in Chem 1A, BC, both at Berkeley and at UC Davis, I'm in there with a whole bunch of pre-med weenies. They don't care about anything but getting into med school. I mean, they have blinders on. So it was highly competitive for a non-kind of chemistry person as a senior getting into it. So I enjoyed my stay at UC a lot.
All right, so I thought this was a good point to break up our conversation. Tune in next week as we continue and discuss Smith-Madrone's wines and hear the inside story about Measure C. What side of the debate will you choose to be on? Sláinte! Thanks for listening to Dracaena Wines Podcast. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like us to discuss, please reach out to us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, Google, and Periscope as @Dracaena Wines. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt Budd, or email us at dracaenawines.com. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher to help others find us more easily. We are found on all of your favorite aggregators. To subscribe easily to iTunes, go to bit.ly/Dracaena podcast. That's bit.ly/Dracaena podcast. And that's a capital D for Dracaena and capital P for podcast. Please check out our award-winning wines and find out about our wine club at dracaenawines.com. And remember to always pursue your passion. Sláinte!